Welcome to the Stronger Than Your Boyfriend podcast, a podcast for anyone into fitness.
Especially for all you chest breathers out there.
We are Heather and Katie, owners of Barpath Fitness, here to help you sift through the bullshit and toxic misinformation that permeates the fitness industry. Today we're talking about breathing and bracing.
Yes, we are. We had a good blog about this. Well, we still do. It was ranking. Wasn't it ranking number 1 for a bit?
Yeah, I'm sure it's still
was
good.
Up there.
It's old.
But it was old.
The 2016 blog. But by the time that you hear this podcast episode, oh no, I just promised something. It will be updated.
Yes. Uh-oh. Okay, we'll get on that.
Yeah.
But yes, this is a fun topic. So.
Yes, so we're going to talk a lot about breathing today, various breathing techniques, not like meditative breathing techniques, but lifting breathing techniques. And we're also going to talk about the core and bracing, as well as kind of different types of bracing, I suppose. Bracing versus hollowing, et cetera.
Yeah.
But the main thing we want to cover is obviously most of y'all are lifting, and we want to make sure that you're lifting safe. So we're going to cover breathing and bracing, which is foundational information if you are lifting weights. So if you don't know what we're talking about, please listen.
Yes, breathing in relation to your strength training, or I guess, well, we're not going to talk about breathing as far as how it relates to endurance. This is mostly just to protect yourself and your lower back, etc., when you are lifting heavier loads. So that's kind of the general gist we're going to get into. But your breathing is important for any lift, whether you're maxing out, whether you're going for super heavy loads or not. So your core, when we talked about it, your core is involved in every movement, and so is your breathing. So that's why it's really important. And breathing changes with exercise. And the first thing, or a lot of times the first thing that I have to do with clients is get them to breathe correctly. Yeah. And we're not even talking about bracing the core, just breathing with the movement properly. Right. So generally the cue is to exhale on the hardest part of the lift. So if we're taking a squat, for example, which we're probably going to talk about the squat a lot today when we cover examples, that's the concentric part. So that's the up part where you're pushing the most to stand the weight back up. So if I can get them to do that, then we can take it a step further and I can teach them how to breathe with their diaphragm, even though I'm already going to start teaching them that. Yeah. It's just a lot to learn at once. You don't even have to be a new lifter. You just have to be new to this way of breathing for it to be overwhelming. So you want to take it one step at a time. Yeah. So that will, enter the diaphragmatic breathing. So your diaphragm is a muscle. That is how humans are meant to breathe. And breathing during heavy loads is always the hardest, okay? So we need to use our diaphragm, enter the Valsalva maneuver, which is just breathing. I don't know if this is like more technical than what
Let me back up and talk a little bit more about diaphragmatic breathing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of times with diaphragmatic breathing, I teach this during the warm-up, right? With clients, like I just make sure they can do it, especially like a first session. We have them lie on the floor. We'll talk about that later a little bit, I think. But the diaphragm is a muscle that you can train. And what I find is that if people have done choir or musical instruments, or sometimes yoga, they just do it naturally. Like I am a choir kid. I'm a show choir baby. I did not play sports, but I did do show choir. And I've always known how to diaphragmatically breathe because that's how you sing. But there are a lot of people, most people, if you're not someone who came up in music, you're going to chest breathe. Right. And so when you breathe through diaphragm, the reason that it allows you to get a bigger breath, because as that muscle contracts, it actually lowers and it allows your lungs to expand more. So that's why the breath is bigger when you diaphragmatically breathe. Yeah.
It encourages full oxygen exchange. Right. And you'll notice that if you are doing some endurance exercise, you're probably going to be chest breathing, but that's just because you're trying to just fill your lungs with air, and it's hard, and that's okay. It's just like, the example, you don't want to breathe with your mouth all the time. You want to be a nose breather, but when you're breathing hard, you're going to breathe with your mouth. Same thing with breathing with your diaphragm, but you still can train it, right? And when you master this, you are encouraging core stability, which is important for every single movement. So we can talk about the lying on the floor example. Sure. If you don't know what we're talking about or how to do it, and this is how I teach, I'm sure you teach clients the same thing, the same way. Yeah. So it's easiest when you're lying down because you're not standing and, there's gravity isn't really involved. You're just lying on the floor. So what you want to do is place your hand on your belly And you want to try, as you inhale, to fill your belly with air. So have your belly actually pooch up or come up as you inhale. And then as you exhale, it should come back down to normal, or how it was prior to taking that big inhale. Yeah. So that's a good way to practice it. And, you can practice it in bed. You can practice it whenever. You could do it standing too. It's just, I think it's easiest for people when you lie down. So that's a way to, it's a way to learn how to do it. Mm-hmm. But then I think people can get the hang of it when they're lying down, but then it's like, then you throw in the lifting and then it's like, I don't know what to do. It comes with practice. Mm-hmm. It comes over time. I think I got good at it. You got good at it with powerlifting, because in which we'll talk about, which you're lifting heavy loads a lot. So you need to learn how to brace your core and use your diaphragm to breathe, or else you will fuck up your lower back or something.
For sure. I have like a regular pranayama practice now, a breath practice, but yogic breathing actually is kind of cool. And I didn't realize that I could do this, but you breathe through. So this is another way to practice it. So once you master the belly breath, you can then practice breathing all the way up. So like you breathe in and your belly expands, then it goes up your sternum and up to your chest and even your clavicle.
Cool.
And then you try to like exhale the opposite way, which doesn't always happen, but the inhale basically starts in the belly and then goes up the body, which I've seen that as well in powerlifting when it comes to the bar.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people, because we're talking about a belly breath, right? And so you would think the bar wouldn't move, but if they do a full breath that goes all the way through the chest, the bar might go up a little bit too, because their chest might move too, as long as that belly's moving.
Yeah. So. And that's another thing. I feel like people are going to try to only move their belly. Your chest is going to rise too.
You have lungs.
Yes, we have lungs. You're filling your lungs with air too, but the diaphragm is helping you to breathe. It's the muscle to help you breathe. So. And another cool tidbit about diaphragmatic breathing is that if you are using your diaphragm more to breathe, maybe not when you're out of breath or you're walking or whatever, you're not thinking about it, but generally throughout the day, it'll improve your HRV, your heart rate variability.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Wait, that makes a lot of sense.
It does, because you're just anything where you're doing what your body is meant to do. I think that will always help your HRV. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not.
That's totally right.
Yeah.
Mine has jumped from like 30, which is terrible, to like 130.
Wow.
Yeah. Since I started this whole yoga thing.
The yoga.
Like, there's a lot of breathing.
There is.
So, I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think another cool way to teach box breathing, or not box breathing. That's how I like to help encourage diaphragmatic breathing is box breathing. And this isn't going to be in a workout. This is almost like a meditative style of breathing.
Practice,
but you breathe in for 4 or 5 seconds, then you hold for the same amount of seconds, and then you try to exhale for the same amount of seconds. And you can feel your belly, expanding and then, coming back to normal as you exhale. So that's a cool way to. It's almost the right cadence to feel that diaphragmatic breath as it's happening. So because you are counting and then you're almost focusing, it's helping you to focus on the breath that you're trying to accomplish. So
totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's talk about bracing versus hollowing.
Yes.
Okay.
What is the difference?
Yes. Okay. So we've talked about diaphragmatic breathing, and the reason that we're tying this into bracing is because you're going to, when you go up to do a squat, a deadlift, even an overhead press, like anything where you're loading the spine and the spine has to support you, there is a specific way to breathe, which we're going to get into in a minute. Mm-hmm. But I think people sometimes confuse bracing versus hollowing.
Yes.
So hollowing is an interesting kind of concept where I've heard a couple different definitions of it, so I'm going to use the definition I found in a study because I think that's the easiest way to think about it. Mm-hmm. Hollowing is when the belly button is maximally drawn to the spine, whereas abdominal bracing is a isometric co-contraction of all abdominal muscles, similar to how you tighten your abs if someone were to punch you in the gut, right?
Right. That's another good cue I like to use too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like think about something or I try to tell clients if they're not getting it, like think that I'm about to punch you in the stomach. What would you do?
It's super fun when you have a brand new client. Yeah. And it's your first day and you tell them to get into a position and you're like, okay, now if I were to punch you in the stomach.
Now if I were to just beat the shit out of you.
Wait a second.
Yeah. No, I try to gauge the client and the personality. Like, can I get away with saying that? Yes, okay.
But yes, it's that same kind of thing. So one way to think about it is bracing is more out and maybe even a little bit down, whereas hollowing is in and up, right? But I'm gonna talk a little bit about the research, but I think the research here is hard because I personally believe when I hear these two things, I use them in different ways. And I use them at different parts of the breath. But let's talk about the studies first. So honestly, there needs to be more research on this. And I think it's because the language, like what we describe as hollowing, could be a few different things, in my opinion, as well as bracing.
Okay.
Like I think there's a lot more to both of these than we think. Like there's a lot, like people could brace 30%, people could brace 100%. They could involve their pelvic floor. They could not involve their pelvic floor. Like there's a lot here. So research is really hard, I think, when it comes to studying this. Like one study showed that the deep abdominal muscles are more activated with hollowing, and the surface muscles were more activated with bracing. Okay, this was a really small study.
Yeah.
Another study, though, found that abdominal bracing provides greater lumbar stability than abdominal hollowing, which
that makes
agree
sense.
because that's why we do that when we squat, right? And in that study, they used the definitions that I used, right? But a larger review just back in 2024, so just last year, actually looked at a bunch of clinical trials. I think it looked at 22 clinical trials, including these probably. And they found that both techniques can significantly improve trunk stability, muscle thickness, balance, and gait. However, a notable gap exists in studies comparing these, raising questions whether they are equally effective. Hollowing is associated with selective activation of the transverse abdominals.
Okay.
Right? So TVA muscle, right?
Yeah.
I think of that when I think of hollowing as well. Whereas bracing promotes a co-contraction of all the trunk muscles, contributing to robust spinal ability.
Robust spinal ability.
So in other words, both are great, but more research is needed. But this is how I think of it too. And my interpretation of this with my personal practice is with breath. So bracing is done after the inhale. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hollowing, in my opinion, is done after the exhale.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you breathe in and your belly expands.
And then you brace.
You brace, right?
Bear down.
Then you breathe out, and then that's when you can hollow more, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the hollowing exercises. There's tightening of the TVA. This is done a lot in yoga. Like when we twist, you inhale and you like stand taller and you straighten the spine. When you exhale, you rotate, but you also kind of like really breathe the abdominals in.
Yeah.
Because you're exhaling all your air out.
Yeah.
And you can tighten your TVA.
Yeah.
So that's how I use them. So in my mind, they're like two completely different things.
Right. Do you think we should be using them each breath, like both techniques then? I mean, not bracing 100%.
Right, yes.
But a little bit of each.
Yes, I think that when you have good posture,
you
naturally start to do all this all the time, right? You got a little bit of brace and a little bit of, I don't want to say hollowing. I feel like hollowing, when I think of hollowing, I think of the extreme.
Yeah,
right?
me too. Like
abdominal hollowing, organ massage, like, you know, like that deep, which there is some benefit to.
Right.
But what I'm talking about is like a 10% just like hardening after you exhale of your TVA and just like a toning, a tightness.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And that's a good note. And you mentioned it earlier that you're not bracing your core 100% on every lift.
Yes.
The only time you would do that, I could see, is if you're going for a max in let's say a powerlifting competition or something like that. So it's not about you're trying to do this maximally, maximally bracing or maximally hollowing.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good point because I never think about hollowing.
Yeah.
I just think about teaching clients and myself when I'm doing these heavy lifts to brace my core, to protect my spine and my lower back.
Yeah.
But I honestly haven't given it much merit because I always have thought, since we wrote that blog back in 2016, well, hollowing not good,
right?
Bracing good, you know, and especially when we're talking about lifting.
Yeah.
So
and they're used in two different schools of thought a lot.
Yeah.
Like a lot of lifters are like bracing, down and out, and they almost like rupture shit because they're going so hard with the down and out, right?
Yeah. And if they
and then you have your yogis and your Pilates people who really practice a lot of hollowing, and there's a ton of benefits.
Yeah.
And I have found this nice balance between the two, I think. And that's like not completely hollowing, and it's not 100% bracing either. Like it's this beautiful, I do them at different times, but like it really gets me in tune with my abdominal muscles.
Yeah. And, you know, when you're doing a set of high rep squats or deadlifts, it's really hard to think about keeping that braced core, right? Because you're breathing. I mean, it's cardio. So, you know, we're not saying you have to go, you know, and bear down every squat rep that you do.
Yes, please don't bear down.
Yeah.
Let me put that out there because when you say bear down, that's when people go extreme down and out.
And they blow something out.
Breathing is a light, natural thing. And yes, you want to brace, but it really shouldn't be that crazy. And I remember when we first started powerlifting, I was going hard with this. I was like, I will breathe and I will brace so hard.
And then we made it a point to, or all the powerlifters make it a point to make that noise, you know, like, and then purse the lips right before they're going for their max attempts. You know what I mean? So going hard with the bracing.
Yeah. But I remember talking to Christina, and if this was an older episode, but pelvic floor.
Good
episode with pelvic floor therapist Christina Holland. She was talking to me about how breathing is like a natural thing, and she's seen a lot of people go way too hard on breathing and bracing, and really it should be this like kind of lighter situation. Like yes, it's a big, deep belly breath, but the brace is, it's not like 110%. It's not hard.
It's not hard
to brace.
It should be natural.
Yeah.
It should be a natural thing that you do, and you can do it a little bit more if you're going for a very heavy load. That's all we're trying to say.
Yes.
But I wanna talk a little bit about holding your breath.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into that. Yeah.
It depends on the situation.
Okay.
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 Well, first and foremost, almost all my clients hold their breath when we're doing core movements, which I understand why, because it's associated, it's, you know, where your diaphragm is. So it's hard to figure it out, right? Especially when you're doing an isometric hold, like some type of plank variation, and it's hard to breathe because you're just like, oh, I want to get through this. Or, you know, maybe some core movement where you're moving through it too. But so half the time I'm trying to get clients to breathe more, half the time, well, not even half the time I'm trying to get them to not breathe as much, because that's not really the case. Most clients will just hold their breath.
Yeah.
And it's okay to do that, you know, and going back to the you know, maximal or heavy loads, you know, when you're going for a 1 rep max, you're not breathing the whole time through. Like you're probably exhaling right at the end of the rep, right? But it's only 1 rep. So there has to be a balance, because I've had clients get super lightheaded. You know, you can hold your breath for a short while. So for example, when I'm squatting, even if it's higher reps, I'm going to hold my breath, but I'm going to, you know, for most of the rep until the end of the rep. Okay. And that helps me keep my core tight. I don't even want to say braced.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about intra-abdominal pressure and like what this is?
Yeah, so that's what diaphragmatic breathing is doing.
Yeah.
You're creating intra-abdominal pressure, and that intra-abdominal pressure is what's creating that core stability.
Yeah. You can think of you may have seen the pop can analogy, right? Where if you put a can of soda on the floor and it's open, right? The top tab is open and you smush it with your foot, it's just going to, right? But if you keep the can closed, that's intra-abdominal pressure. It's really hard to smash.
Yeah.
That's your spine.
Yes.
Right?
Spine is hard to smash.
So your spine is hard to break when you have intra-abdominal pressure.
Right.
Enter the weight belt.
Yeah.
Right.
Weight belt.
Yeah.
Okay. Full disclosure, I don't use weight belts with any mic. I don't even know why I said full disclosure. I don't think that it's a good, I don't think it's a very good practice for most people, because you can become reliant on a weight belt. So a lot of time, let me backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
Some people use weight belts to get, you know, a little bit of an edge, a little bit, they're able to lift a little bit more on their compound lifts, mostly just squatting and deadlifting.
Yeah.
I rarely get a client that will ask me, you know, should I use a weight belt? Can I use a weight belt? Most of my clients are they're general, you know, lifters. They just want to be healthy and fit. So they're not thinking about that. But I did have one client recently, and she's a badass and she's really strong. And she was like, well, what do you think about me wearing a weight belt? And I was like, here's the deal. Yes, it can help. I think there's benefit to it. It can help teach you a little bit, because you get that feedback from the belt.
Yeah.
So you're now feeling your belly distend forward and push into the belt. And it's kind of pushing back on you. So you can feel that you're for lack of a better term, like doing it correctly.
Right.
However, I don't like to use it because I don't want clients, myself or my clients or whoever, to become reliant on it. I want my clients to be able to teach their own body how to do that.
Yeah.
And use their core and get their core stronger. And I'm also not in the camp of, well, I don't need to do core work because all I do is squat and deadlift heavy and I don't wear a weight belt. So that's not the case either. Because, you hear about that
You
from
do. Well, I
the
squat
bros.
heavy.
Yeah, squat heavy. I don't need to do core work. Well, you do. And that's why you're getting injured half the time. So there's also that. And it's a delicate balance. If you're competing, if you are competing in powerlifting, yes, we will use the weight belt. You are allowed to use weight belts in competition. However, we still won't use the weight belt for most of your training.
Yeah, that is true.
Competition training,
Right.
where the days you are working up to heavy whatever, and okay, well, you can use it in competition. Why not learn how to use it better in your training too? Once in a while, also for fun, like my clients who are really strong, I know that their form is always good. I'll be like, and most of the time it's them asking me, but we'll be like, okay, they're on the weight belt and let's see if you can get 5 more pounds.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it might help you do.
Right.
5 to 10 more pounds max.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just because you have that, it's like in the example of, a seated row. And I know this might seem we're going to left field, but a lot of times I have clients who, when we're doing rows, they can't feel their back muscles. So all I'll do is lightly touch them and they can feel it more.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that.
Kinesthetic feedback. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a very intelligent way of putting it. So yeah, it's just feeling it, and your core is feeling you breathing and somewhat bracing properly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the weight belt does give good feedback for that. But the goal, yes, I would say, even with my powerlifting clients and with myself, I realize the importance of beltless training.
Yes.
Yes, you have to break in a new belt, so you have to use it. And yes, you have to get used to using it for competition if you're going to use it in competition. And yes, you should, because it will give you an edge.
Yeah.
Right? But I agree. I think that off season especially, like there's a lot of reasons to not train with a weight belt. And my rule of thumb is, with powerlifting clients, 80-85% or higher.
Yeah.
There's no reason to wear a weight belt if you're going under that.
Yeah.
Honestly. Especially, but if you're, or if, you are training for a competition and therefore you can't really auto-regulate as well. Like you have this very prescribed sets, reps, percentage you have to hit. Your back is fatigued, and you know that will help, and you're going to lift any, which, I mean, there's an argument that you shouldn't be doing that anyway. Like you should listen to your body a little more.
Yeah,
but I get that athletes are going to push
athletes
themselves.
in competition.
And if the belt is going to help you, feel a little bit better, then you can wear it on those rare occasions. But otherwise I like 80% or higher. Competition prep. If you're feeling yourself and you want to go higher, heavier,
test that shit out.
And if you're breaking in a
Post
new
your
belt,
PR.
you do have to use it.
Yeah.
Like more than usual.
Yeah. This is kind of the extreme of this, but do you remember squeams? Do you know the squeam?
What's a squeam?
It's like, it's almost like a weight. It's not a belt, but I think it's this wrap you wear around your core to like get it, quote, tighter.
Is this for like bodybuilding?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think a lot of bodybuilders wore it because they wanted, that it's supposed to, quote, help that, V taper look.
Yeah.
This is a problem because your core muscles can atrophy if they just have this support all the time. So
all the time, yes.
Yeah, all the time. I'm not talking about
Here's the thing
here
about
and
the
there.
squeams. I don't know a lot about these things.
I think that's what they're called.
I have no idea. I've never heard of this.
It's like, or the one of the like Kim Kardashian, they probably made that, like wear it around your core and get toned.
What those are doing is imitating what I'm talking about with hollowing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is hard to brace with those.
You can't brace.
But you can hollow.
Yeah.
So that's where the argument comes in of which is better and blah, 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 because people are using these and whatnot. And I don't think it's a bad thing to learn how to hollow, but yes, you should learn how to do it on your own.
Do it on your own is the case we're making.
Now, again, if you're competing and you want a smaller waist, I don't really know, honestly, the research around if that works. But I know people swear by it.
Well, you might get a smaller waist if your core muscles atrophy, but do you want that? But also, I feel like, especially a lot of women get afraid of having like too thick of a core.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Yeah. Your core isn't going to get thick unless maybe you're built that way, but you should just know that that's the way you're built.
I think that in the bikini world, though, I think there is a real. Well, we could go on about how the dangers of bodybuilding and things like that.
Maybe we should do a whole episode on that one.
Yeah. But I think there is a real argument there because there is some research that shows like hollowing training and things like that.
Yeah.
There is a research that shows that can help strengthen your TVA, which will allow your waist to. I don't know if it actually gets smaller or if you just get better at standing with good posture.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know.
There's some research there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know.
I just think using something for support always is never going to be good.
Agreed.
You need to, strength is health, in my opinion.
Yeah. And general population, you shouldn't even be considering that, I feel like. Right? We're talking about competitors.
Yes.
Right.
You don't need squeams.
But
or whatever they're called.
I have never heard this word.
Maybe that's just
we'll Google it and it'll be something
else. I hope that the description we were talking about explains it a little bit better.
What it is. It's a waist trainer. It's called a waist trainer.
A waist trainer, yeah. Maybe that's just a slang term for it. It just sounds so lame. Yeah. Waist trainers, yes. Yeah, we'll go with waist trainers.
Yeah, totally.
But so it just like you don't want to wear a weight belt when you're lifting every single session because then when you are doing heavy loads or maybe moderate loads, you won't be able to do them without the weight belt. You don't want to get to that point.
Yeah, you don't want to rely on it.
You don't want to rely on it.
Just like any piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Just like if you're benching and you're using wrist wraps, occasionally you don't want to use wraps. Like knee sleeve, same thing. Like all of it you can get dependable on and you want your body to be as strong as possible on its own.
And I think there's a good argument for, directly training your core too, which obviously there's an argument for that. We have a whole episode on that, but also, I do think a lot of people are like, well, just squat and deadlift heavy. No. But flexing your spine, extending your spine with load, maybe with, load, it doesn't mean weights. It could mean with your body weight, which is a lot of core training. You learning how to breathe and brace through that is really important. And I think if you can do that, you're going to be in a really good position to do it, to have it carry over to your other lifts.
Yeah.
But to keep your core strong too, it's like accessory training for your breathing almost,
Yeah. Anti-rotation too.
Yeah. Anti-rotation.
Yeah.
And rotation. All of it.
Yeah, right.
You want to learn how to stabilize, but you also want to rotate your core too.
Yeah, you want to use your spine.
Yes.
It flexes, extends, it laterally flexes. It does all these things.
And I think people are afraid to flex their spine because, everyone thinks, when they're in that afraid cat position, that's bad. But your spine is meant to do that.
Yes.
And if your core is strong and you know how to breathe properly, you're pretty much halfway there.
Yeah.
Then it comes the programming, the good form, etc. So, So I think weight belts once in a while.
Yeah.
Learn how to brace your core, learn how to use your core, train your core stability.
Yeah.
And you can do that through direct core training. You could also do that with your heavy lifting, but don't rely on the weight belt. And then maybe throw it on once in a while if you want to post your PR. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Cool.
So Valsalva maneuver, before we sign off.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that just the diaphragmatic breathing? I know
it's the holding.
Yeah, it's the holding. Okay. And I know people talk about that in relation to powerlifting.
Yeah.
But I know we've talked about that, but it's one and the same, in my opinion, kind of, you breathe, you're holding your breath as you're coming up on the hardest part of the lift, but that's just the Valsalva maneuver. That's the portion of it.
I think the Valsalva maneuver is a little more technical than that, but I think it's like, it's involved in that. I think it's like a forced exhale against like a closed, it's something that creates intra-abdominal pressure. It's a similar breathing technique. I don't know all the details, but basically what we do is very similar to that.
Yeah, and I was reading about it, and it's not just in relation to lifting.
Right, yes,
it's
correct.
For other life purposes too. It's not just a lifting thing.
Oh, there are so many breath practices. That might be a good podcast one day.
Yeah.
There's like a lot.
Yeah.
Many.
Should have an expert on that one.
Yes.
That would be cool. Are there breathing experts out there?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
Breathwork. Yeah, there's breathwork.
If you want to be on our podcast, come on over. Yeah, we want to interview you.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yes. Okay. Anything you want to close with? Breathe. Use your core. Breathe with your diaphragm. And join our Facebook group.
Yes.
Yes. Stronger Than a Boyfriend, if you didn't know what it was called. And peace out.